How's it going, everybody? Well, my name's Carpo, and I'm going to make this video to discuss an issue that has been bothering me for a couple days. I've always been a big fan of philosophy. I've been a big fan of knowledge. I've been a big fan of those who promote tolerance and understanding. The real heroes in history are the ones who have promoted peace and understanding. And when I discovered Manly P. Hall a few years back, I instantly fell in love with his philosophy, with what he had to share to the world. And the more I heard, the more I had to hear, to where I downloaded every one of his lectures that I could find, and pretty much had them on repeat shuffle, or rather shuffle, on my MP3 player for about a year. Listened to thousands of hours of his speeches. Then I got The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which is a book that Manly Hall wrote when he was just 27 years old. I think it came out in the 30s, or 1929 or something. Mr. Hall lived to be about 90 years old, and I believe he was 89 years old, sorry. And in 1990, it was September 3rd, I believe, 1990, he died. And I never really looked too much into his death. If you look at the actual articles and the news clippings from the time, they will say that he just died and that he was held for 72 hours with his spiritual wishes or whatnot. And apparently the man Fritz, I believe it was Daniel Fritz, was the man who reported this. And anybody can go up and look. I'll try to post this link from Manly Hall's wife, who posted a 7-page, basically, declaration of her knowledge of the intent to murder Mr. Hall by Fritz and 2 other companions. Manly Hall spent his life talking about the need for an understanding of non-materialism. He had no real desire for material gain at all, yet he had a lot of money, and he was basically funded by people who wanted to promote the type of work he was doing. Now, before I go any further, I'd say a lot of people instantly will say that Mr. Hall was well, I read an article earlier which was pretty offensive. They used the term Jewry, Jewry, which is, having to do with Jews. And the belief, this anti-Semitism that never went away, has reached a fevered frenzy, a fevered pace, to where everyone is basically blaming Jews for all of the world's problems. And anyone who has any knowledge or insight or is trying to promote philosophy is somehow involved with this Jewry, because they're trying to distract our minds with philosophy. The guy who wrote the article wrote all this stuff about how Mr. Hall's whole purpose was to distract us, and he was Illuminati, and yada yada yada. And reading that, I wanted to just declare that, because a lot of people instantly dislike Manly Hall. They think that he's somehow an evil person or satanic, and many people who are Christians would instantly believe that Manly Hall, since he's not a Christian, then he must be, somehow possessed or on the other side. Manly Hall had a photographic memory. Apparently he could remember anything, and he was accused, many people suspected plagiarism and whatnot, because he would just memorize these ideas and he put them into this book. The Secret Teachings of All Ages basically was the pinnacle of his early life and everything he'd learned up to 27. And there's a lot of suspicion over that book, because the original copies that were released, I think it was a limited edition of like 1,000 copies, at a cost of $150,000. And this was back in 1920. Now, in today's dollars, that's not a cheap production. And these books were huge, beautiful, bound copies. And the book was already in print and taken and put in print before it was even finished and accepted. And it was a very high quality, and they were already sold out and highly in demand. The first editions are probably impossible to find. I'd love to get one, but Anyway, the guy that wrote this article I was reading, he said he claimed he had read the whole book. And I thought about this for a minute, and I thought anyone who's actually read the book may gain a little bit of understanding of what Manly Hall tried to share as far as knowledge. But when it came to wisdom and his personal opinions, his lectures were where it's at. And apparently he would charge $1 for his lectures. And he always wanted to promote these same types of ideas. Many people claim that Manly Hall was promoting this or that, whether it be, something against religion. But I've listened to all of his lectures, and he was very respectable. He would go in and he would explain the metaphors behind Christ and the cross and the religions, but without throwing it in anybody's face. He didn't try to push it on anybody, and he said it respectfully, as if a Christian was trying to explain a Muslim Christian values, but in a Muslim way that they understand. And my belief is that Hall was a very wise man. So back to his death. When his wife came to get the body, you can read the report she wrote, and she explains it better than I could, but she shows up at the house, and he's laying on the bed. It's a made bed, and he's laying there, and they claimed he died in his sleep. He's in his suit. There's hundreds of ants crawling out of the guy's mouth and his ears. And this sight is just disturbing to me. And the carpet cleaners were there cleaning his room, the carpet in his room. All types, not only that, but all of his antiques were gone off the wall. His stamp collection was looted. Everything was gone out of the room. And 3 days before that, Fritz and his cronies had tried to set up this trust fund with Manly Hall and his wife. And unfortunately, before they could collect on this fund, I guess they had to get her to sign over. And apparently they probably smothered Manly Hall in his sleep. Perhaps he was outside, because the ants, that were thousands of ants in his head, in his mouth, and his ears. And Fritz tried to have him cremated, but his wife refused it and said no way. And then he tried to have him embalmed, but she refused and managed to keep him to have an autopsy. Then she paid $12,000 to have him a personal private autopsy, which revealed all kinds of inconsistencies. But Fritz was never accused. He was never convicted. And I guess he died in 2001. If I'm not mistaken, his son and someone else were possibly involved. But I know there were some companions, and I just learned about this the other day, and I'm still looking into this. But it's very bothersome. It's almost like Manly Hall spoke so much about karma, about paying debts in this life, and it's very ironic that he would be taken in such a way. You would think the man would be able to die a peaceful, death as an old man in his own time. And I feel so bad for what his wife had to go through. And knowing the things that he tried to promote. If you look at the Los Angeles Times from the article, I think it's September 3rd or 23rd, 1990, and it's right when he died, and the article is talking about how Mr. Fritz said, oh, Manly Hall was such a great man, and all these things. But the truth comes out, and his wife, and here's the most amazing thing, one of the parts that really kind of amazed me. I guess amazed isn't the right word, but I thought it was a great touch. She went to bed early that night, his wife, because she was going to go up and go see him the next day. And he hadn't been doing well for months, and she suspected that they'd been doing something to him. But when she talked to her husband, when Fritz and the guys were out of the room, she said he was scared to death, and he said, don't rock the boat. There was something going on between him and those people, and they were trying to heal him with these really odd methods, apparently. And there was something going on that he didn't want to share. And something secret, spiritual. He was a mystical guy. Who knows what kind of things he was doing. But she was very suspicious about it. And they've been doing all kinds of strange things. But I find it very strange. She went to bed early that night, around 7. She said she woke up at 9. And she was awake from like 9 to midnight. And she said she woke up, shot up in bed, and she could hear heavy labored breathing. And then eventually it stopped, and because she felt like it was her husband, because he'd had lung problems, and she heard it, and then she said it stopped, and she felt like a burden had been lifted from him. And the next day she realized why that had happened, that psychic connection I mean, Mr. Hall was an amazing man. A guy with a photographic memory that wanted to share and help people. And I guess he's the perfect example to me of how people can take someone so wonderful and beat him down and call him a Jew and an Illuminati, shill agent, all the different things they would call him. And I could see how if a person listened to one of his lectures or read one part of his book or one of his books, they might get that image. But the fact is, after you listen to a couple thousand hours of this stuff, it's just, holy cow, you know, it's just amazing. Like, he's not trying to impress, although his ego dominates some of the lectures. You could tell he's a little bit, hostile towards those who smoke weed or take drugs. He was very anti-drug and kind of a purist. He reminded me of an old boss I used to have, actually, he was actually a Freemason, but we called him the Raccoon because he was always preening himself and he was always obsessed with being clean, and he was kind of a bitchy old man. And I think Manly Hall was kind of a bitchy old man too. In other words, all of our heroes have their demons, you know. He was just a human, after all. I mean, gosh. Can't give him God status or anything. And even if there are gods, I guess they're imperfect too, you know, because ultimately everything comes from nothing and returns back to it. So during the process, we meet a few prophets along the way, a few great teachers and wise men. And the article I'd read, and Manly Hall is one of them, and the article I read by that guy who was accusing him of being a Jew, he was saying how Manly Hall was, he said, well, if we all went off to be monks, then we couldn't perpetuate our species and all this stuff. And I've heard Manly Hall say himself, not all men can be monks. In other words, anything that anyone has ever said about Manly Hall saying and tried to make that as a point that he's wrong, I could find you an equal Manly Hall statement that shows the other side of it. Because he understood balance, he understood you can't just point everybody in the same direction. He never insulted religion. He just said that religion needs to stop dogma and that religions won't go away. They need to accept each other. And that was one of the most profound, moving thing that I learned from him. So if somebody out there says, you know, say a Christian out there who's listening to Manly Hall and maybe listening to this and says, well, Manly Hall, you know, he's not a Christian, so therefore he's against Christianity, my response would be, people like Manly Hall made me and others more tolerant towards Christianity, but more tolerant towards Islam as well, and other religions, but by understanding what people like Christ and Muhammad really wanted, not what the people that came after tried to tell us. The astrological roots of all holidays, the astrological roots of everything, you know, everything we celebrate, you know, the solstice, the winter solstice, the spring solstice, Easter, equinox. All of these have roots that we should embrace, and Hall spoke about these things consistently, and it was, I guess, astrotheology, if you will, was kind of the root of astrology, which was the root of astronomy, and, you know, now we're getting back to that, believing that, you know, some of these greater energies come from the universe, that there is a vibration to everything, that maybe the people in the mystery schools weren't so messed up or crazy, you know. I guess all philosophers are a little loony. Anyway, I'm going to part ways, so have a great evening. I just wanted to get that out there and talk about Paul. It's kind of bothersome in that image of that little old man with ants coming out of his face. It really bothered me, and I'm very curious about this Fritz guy and whether or not any of these guys are still alive and what really happened, because you got to dig deep to find information. So I'm going to keep looking. If any of them are still alive, if they happen to be young enough at the time when it happened to where they're still living today, and if any of them happen across this video by chance searching for themselves, you know, damn you for doing that. Damn you for killing such a great man. Yet all the great men have been martyrs, and it's always for power or money or fear of a greatness. Anyway, have a great evening, everybody.